broadcast on Discuss the Chosen, where we take a look at the popular hit television series called The Chosen, which is an artistic interpretation of the life of Jesus while he was here on earth and his early disciples. And tonight we're really, I've been blessed by this episode, and I hope that you will be too as we discuss it, because we're going to be looking at actually the very last sign miracle that Jesus did in the New Testament, and that's the raising of a man by the name of Lazarus. So we're going to talk more about that. I have a few guests here with me this evening, and so let's go ahead and we'll get going here. Hello, my friends, and my wife, of course, too.
Good evening.
So, how's things been going for you guys?
Good.
Were you able to make it through the entire broadcast of this episode?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, Janice?
I have to confess I fell asleep a couple times.
That's what happens when you get to be elderly. You sit in your recliner, and then pretty soon, bam, you're gone. So this is such a cool story in the New Testament, and that, and of course, The Chosen is just an artistic interpretation of the life of Christ, and it doesn't map 100% on everything that is going on in the life of Christ, but it does it does give some very provocative kind of like ideas or thoughts that it always gets me thinking. Here's one of the things that got me thinking about tonight. It's just one of the things that got me thinking about tonight's episode, is that when I read the New Testament, is that the New Testament really is kind of very pared down. So it just gives you, even though we have 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that 3 of those 4 Gospels cover, like, I don't know, I'd have to look it up, but, like 80 to 90% of the same territory. And so there's just kind of this economy of descriptions and information. But what I particularly liked about this episode particularly is that it got me thinking a lot about the backstory of the disciples and where they were at, because the New Testament, the Gospels don't really give us a whole lot of it doesn't fill in the blanks hardly at all about the backstory of the disciples' lives and their emotional frame of mind as they were going through and following Jesus. And of course, The Chosen takes a lot of artistic license with that. But I think it's good, and I think they're able to bring out some important themes that people of faith need to be thinking about. But how about for you guys, just overall impression of this episode? What did you like? What did you didn't like or felt that they could have done better? Anything? Nikki, ladies first.
I liked when they showed Mary and Martha at the table talking about what had just happened. Because
that was cool.
They don't show that. So, can you imagine the conversation you'd have if your loved one just came out of the grave? And I like that they sat there and talked about that, because you would be awestruck, you would be dumbfounded, it would be unreal, the conversation that you would have. So I like that they sat and talked about that. It was really cool.
Yeah. Awestruck and dumbfounded really don't do it justice.
Right.
Val, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I would just say even the whole show itself, how they start out with Matthew and Mary
Oh, yeah.
years later, and at the end they do it again, and how they put those two scenes together. That was really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a nice little segue. I'm glad that you brought it up, Val, because, oh, and by the way, tonight's episode, we're looking at episode 7, and it's 1 hour and 13 minutes long is the episode length. And as I was working through and developing questions for it, I just said, oh man, this is way too, there's just too much here to bypass. So we're going to take this in a couple, we're going to take a couple bites at the apple, but only one tonight. And we'll just go until we're done with it. And I'm thinking probably the first 8 questions is about as far as we'll go on that. I have about 16 questions, so it makes for a good breaking point. So, oh man, it does this to me all the time, and it just makes me so frustrated. So that's our dog, by the way, hacking in the background.
I thought it was a cat.
No, our dog has some sort of trachea problem, and she goes around doing that all the time. So, but okay. In the opening scene of this episode, Matthew visits Mary Magdalene and shares his gospel with her. In this scene, it seems that Mary is also writing down some of her thoughts about what happened. Read Luke 1:1. Do either one of you guys, any of you guys, have Luke 1:1 handy?
I do.
Okay, go ahead, read it for us, please.
Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word.
Okay, so what Luke says, and by the way, Luke was not one of the original apostles. Luke actually comes to the forefront later on in the storyline, and he becomes a traveling and off and on traveling companion with the Apostle Paul, and so he wrote both the Gospel of Luke and also the Book of Acts, and that and so it seems, based on the words that he just said at the opening of his gospel, that his gospel was a compilation of his research of interviewing people who were eyewitnesses of the event. Now, it's entirely possible he spoke with Mary Magdalene about these things, and it's entirely possible, like he says there, read it just one more time. He said, many have undertaken to what?
Draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. Okay,
so there were other people writing about Jesus, but we see we don't have any of their writings that have been preserved. That doesn't mean that the writings that we have are somehow inadequate, because if God cares enough to send his son, he's going to care enough to get us an accurate account of his son's life and ministry. So even though others wrote accounts about the life of Jesus, none of those have been preserved, only the 4 Gospels. Why do you think that's the case? Why don't we have like 12 Gospels or some of these other documents that people wrote about Jesus? Yeah, go ahead, Val.
I happened to read on this just prior to this, and
okay,
I think one was because Matthew was there, and and I think Mark, I just read on that briefly, and his parents were followers, so they were right there.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that. So so that was interesting. I just happened to catch
Mark
that.
Also, according to tradition, was what's called the amanuensis, or the scribe or the secretary of the Apostle Peter. So many scholars believe that the account that we have in Mark's gospel is really based on Peter's information that he told him, because we don't have a gospel according to Peter, at least not a what's called a canonical or an authentic gospel. That's according to Peter. So, but what we do have is that the only gospels that we have from the first century is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's it. Those are the only ones that we have, and that and they had some sort of apostolic connection. So they were considered authoritative by the early church because of their apostolic connection. Matthew, an apostle; John, an apostle; Luke, a traveling companion with the Apostle Paul, and we'll see how he factors into the story later. And then Mark, who was the amanuensis of Peter. So I'm confident that we have an authentic and accurate accounting of Jesus' life, because I believe in the providence of God, and He's able to give us what we need. So that was a long discussion, or at least a long monologue, actually, by me. So, oh man, I'm trying to get this repositioned. Hang on. And I save all of this stuff ahead of time, and it just never works. So, on Lazarus's house, different ones of the disciples are having conversations about what's happening. Little James says to Mary Magdalene, "Is all this what you expected?" When you started following God, I'm talking about your own personal story here. When you started following God, what did you expect your journey to be like? And what are some important discoveries that you made along the way about expectations of God? Any one of you guys, when you started off on the journey of following God, what did you think it would be like? Go ahead, Nikki.
Well, I was really young. I was in my early 20s, and I thought it was going to be sunshine and lollipops and everything was going to be rosy. And, I didn't think of him as a genie in a bottle, but I did think, well, if I believe, all good things are going to happen. But what I've discovered is his timing is not my timing, but he knows best.
Yeah. Janice or Val, when you started off, what was it like, and what have you discovered?
I think in the beginning, what to expect. Didn't know what to expect. And, so later on, you realize that when you're following Jesus, some prayers are answered, and then you start getting the ones that aren't answered.
Yeah.
So it's just, in the beginning, you just didn't know. I didn't know what to expect. So
Yeah.
a little difficult at the time. So
yeah. Janice, would you like to say anything?
Well, I started walking with God when I was, from the time I was a kid, but when I became a Christian when I was 11. And as I grew older and everything, my life started changing, just because I was older. But a lot of the things that I learned in my church of origin, I ended up changing my thinking about some of those things, and growing and stuff. And I just, all my life, have loved God, and I'm always so grateful for being able to have Him in my life.
Yeah. So, I was really conflicted because I didn't really have any frame of reference for what following God looked like. And when I became a Christian, I had the expectation that that this is going to be so cool. You know, now I'm following God, and He's going to kind of like give me. That was back in the days when everybody was preaching. All the Jesus people were preaching, "Get high on Jesus." And I thought, okay, cool. You know, that this is gonna deliver to me some sort of like serenity. You know, serenity now type of thing, and that, and I'm going to be unfazed by life, and that I'm going to be able to just kind of like, you know, shrug off temptations that come my way or whatever else. Instead, I just ended up with a whole lot of complications. The emotional high that I was seeking did not materialize. That I was left with all sorts of kind of questions, both intellectual and existential, with respect to God, and even with respect to managing my temptations. It's not like as if I fell back into my old ways, but I was really kind of like disappointed that the allure of those things didn't just magically go away, you know. So, and it's been complicated. One of the things that I this is one of the things I love about The Chosen, is that they don't make the walk of faith uncomplicated. You know, even for the disciples, this whole thing is just constantly one of those things that is confusing for them, you know. So, Janice.
I think that one of the things that I can kind of relate with them with is that they didn't really understand what it all meant. You know, they just didn't get the big picture. They didn't understand what, and I kind of was like that as a kid. You know, like I didn't really get it. You know, it took me a long time to you know, just really understand and to accept and grow in my Christian walk.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, thank you guys for being honest about your own experience. So, okay. Mary Magdalene says that she is just grateful for the light. How does practicing gratitude promote our spiritual well-being? Anybody?
I can't say.
Go ahead. You got to do it like this.
I know. I guess you do. I can never find my hand. The more
Yeah, there you go.
the more I practice gratitude and just tell him how much I'm thankful for, the more clear his goodness becomes to me. It's like it just makes the other stuff fade away. The more you just realize how incredible he is, and I'm just so thankful.
Yeah. I am a complainer, and particularly with God, that I am a complainer. I'm not so much of a complainer around the house. I don't think so, Janice, but you know, I mean, you can testify. But, and I know that one of my biggest complaints with God is that he hasn't made earth heaven, even for his followers. And so, and that is confusing. And we'll see this kind of like play out later on in the story of Lazarus and his sisters, and also Thomas and all. But yeah, there's just a lot about God that is mystifying. And I would like for him to take away a lot of the stuff I don't like, you know. But apparently he has other plans. Yeah. And one of the things, and I'm grateful for it, but one of the things I don't like is getting older. Getting older is a privilege that a lot of people don't get. But I don't like having to take Motrin, you know. And Janice and I were talking about today about Tylenol, probably one of the most worthless medications ever invented. You know? You know.
The only one a doctor recommends.
I know, it just drives me nuts. I take some Tylenol. So, but okay, but yeah, and so it's hard, and we know people who have been on this journey a lot longer than we have, and so I hope I can keep a positive attitude as much as possible. Janice.
I think that we need to practice gratitude because it helps us to keep our focus on God and not on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not sitting around moaning and groaning, but we can see the good in the things that are happening in our life.
Yeah. Okay. I love this story. I just love this story so much, and that. So let's just set it up for folks who aren't familiar with the story, and even for those who are, it might be good to just rehash it a bit. But Jesus was in the vicinity, and the close vicinity, and Lazarus's sisters, and I can't remember if they both sent word or if it was just one of them who sent the message, and I look it up. It's in John 11. But they sent Jesus a message. Hey, the one that you love, Lazarus, is sick, and Jesus deliberately delays going to visit Lazarus until he dies. So he's non-responsive. Doesn't acknowledge their letter, doesn't send them a little letter back. Don't worry, everything's going to be okay, ladies. I've been unexpectedly delayed, but just wait and see what's coming. No. Silence. And so he shows up too late, at least according to their thoughts. Martha was struggling with her feelings regarding the delay of Jesus in responding to her appeal for help. When God doesn't respond the way that we think he should, our feelings of confusion and disappointment are natural. What do you think is the wisest way to work through these? And what are some common mistakes that people make in responding to their negative emotions towards God? What's the best way to work through disappointment with God? Go ahead, Nikki.
I think you need to talk to him. I think just tell him how you're feeling. Pray to him.
Yeah. He already knows. It's like there's no surprise to him. So, Janice, you seem to be distracted. Is somebody coming in? Is somebody breaking into the room? Yeah, I
got some news.
Oh yeah, all right. We'll talk about it later. So but I think that I like that idea of talking about it and being transparent with God, because he already knows how we're struggling, and he wants us to have that type of relationship where we can be honest to God. So, but Janice,
I'm actually, like in my later years, finally realizing that, like just to sit down and just, like God can take it, And he has the time to listen to me, because that's what I always think. Well, he's busy with everyone else, you know.
Yeah. Take a number is kind of like going
A
to
long
it's
way.
kind of like going to the DMV, you know.
Right.
Yeah. Take a number. Your number is like 278, and they call out
Right.
number 4.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
well,
I
wait a
really
minute. I seen that Jim Carrey movie where he just pressed yes to everybody's question.
Oh yeah.
well,
Well, and of course, we of course know that Jim Carrey is one of the great spiritual minds of our generation. So,
yeah.
yeah, Nora says he's not too busy for me. She's watching all the way from Philippines tonight.
Oh, is that where she is?
Yeah.
I know her.
So, all right. So you were saying, Janice, about in your old age that, or at least in your mature years.
Yeah, like I'm starting to understand that Satan really can use those times when we're disappointed or confused or just feeling a little off. He will keep whispering in your ear, God doesn't have time for you. What you're feeling is nothing compared to what other people are going through, on and on and on. And
Mm-hmm.
and I just see these little messages from God in my life all the time. Like a song will come on the radio, pre song, and I'll be listening to it, and it's like talking about that He's always there for you, like you're being held. Or
Mm-hmm.
today I was reading, I get these emails, it's through my doctor, but they're it's called Calm, and
Mm-hmm.
it's for people who suffer from anxiety. So I have those. And this guy was just talking about how that you need to accept and love and care for yourself. Like you need to take time to say, it's okay if I say to myself, I care about you and I'm going to take care of you, kind of a thing. Because for me, it's always like, oh, well, just stuff whatever you're feeling because other people are more important. I don't know if this doesn't make any sense, but
It makes perfect sense.
It makes
anyway,
sense.
Mm-hmm.
that's,
Yeah.
like I just kind of felt, I kind of see, like they ask you just, to write down, well, how does this change your mood or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, this just makes me understand how much more that God loves me. That's
Yeah.
what I got from it, was that
Yeah.
God is saying, I love you. And I see that you're going through these things and I'm here with you, whereas Satan's always going, no, he's not. No, he's not.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a form of OCD, self-diagnosed, although I've talked to a therapist about it, at least on one occasion. And his essentially his message to me was that it's as good as it's ever going to get. Not much we can do with you, and but it really is troubling for me because it kind of flares up with the intrusive thoughts, and that can be really problematic because it's one thing for other people to know your outsides, but God knows your insides, and so and a lot of my intrusive thoughts oftentimes are not too pleasant towards God. And so I had the kind of like this big epiphany a few weeks ago. And really one of the things I wish I had with big epiphanies is that they would stick, you know what I'm saying? Is that I have kind of like new insights and then they seem to fade into the background and it's back to the old routines again. But the new insight I had was that I am preoccupied with our relationship. I'm talking about God and me. Our relationship. I'm preoccupied with my side of that relationship. And, I need to love him more. I need to serve him more. My prayer life is not what it should be, and all of that stuff. Or I need to not ever have a bad thought about God or a bad thought about anybody, all that stuff. But I've been studying and also preaching on the book of Ephesians. And it really, in the first 3 chapters of the book of Ephesians, particularly chapter 1, talks about God's relationship with us from his side. And it is just so expansive and glorious and wonderful, loving and kind and gracious and generous. And my inadequacies don't negate any of that. It's not like I can somehow rise up to the standard of being deserving of his favor and his generosity and his love and grace and so on and so forth. That this is just the type of God he is. It's a shame that so many people are so embittered towards him that they cannot see past their own, disappointment and bitterness and so on. Anything else on how to work through these feelings of disappointment? I do want to say one more thing before we move on. Any additional observations that you guys have? Okay, I'll say this. Staying connected in transparent community with people that you can trust and who are mature in their walk with the Lord can just go a huge way towards helping you to offload the junk that rattles around in your own head, So, but okay, let's go ahead and we will come up here to question number 5. What am I doing wrong? Okay, one moment, please. I need Val to operate my tech on all this. Question 5. When Jesus told Martha that he is the resurrection and the life, he meant one thing, but she understood him to be saying something else. Sometimes it's hard, if not impossible, to know what God is doing in our lives. What's the best way to face times like this? When he's just not making any sense. Come on. Hey, there's a lot of times, we really want so much more when I was younger. But there's a lot of times when I felt like just grabbing Jesus by the shoulders and shaking him and say, just say it in plain English so the rest of us can understand it. Why do you always have to be so oblique and cryptic and not just put it out there so I can know what's going on? But he's telling Martha, hey Martha, I'm the resurrection and the life. What's she thinking?
In the end.
Yeah. She's thinking, don't get all theological with me, Jesus, right now. My brother died. And he's saying, hey lady, don't you get it? I'm the resurrection and the life. But how in the world, really, if you stop and think about it, how in the world could her head even have gone there at that time?
Right.
Go ahead, Nikki.
I was just thinking that same thing. I mean, there's a big difference between, turning water into wine and, feeding the 5,000 than bringing somebody up from the dead. And only a couple of them had seen Jairus's daughter. So that is not what that's not where you're going to go, especially when they were talking about him being stinky and stuff.
Yeah.
That's not what you're thinking.
No.
He wasn't just mostly dead.
60%.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a horrible experience. You know, at one level, it's a horrible experience for these women.
Hmm.
You know,
And it
and
was a
what?
horrible experience for Jesus.
Of
You know,
course,
like it really hurt him to see them going through that.
you're
You
Mhm.
jumping
know,
ahead to question number 7. So, um, what made this experience horrible for these women? Go ahead.
I think not only that he died, but that their friend Jesus, who could have healed him, didn't come.
Mhm.
Yeah, he seems to be really insensitive to their needs. You know, then when he comes, you know, how does he make a bad situation even worse initially?
Well, his followers didn't understand him.
Yeah,
Matthew
yeah,
and Peter and questioned him.
and he's
He
and
was
he's
crying.
talking all, huh? Say
He
what?
was crying with them.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, freaking
You're still getting ahead,
why?
Jonas. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, he does do that, but then also he's from Martha's perspective casting out platitudes here.
Mm.
Come on, Jesus. I'm hurting here, and you're talking about the resurrection, you know. So, yeah. Okay. Mary confronts Jesus with some strong emotions. I really like these ladies that play these characters in this,
Mhm.
you know. She confronts Jesus with strong emotions about his unresponsiveness. Our perspective on her story with Jesus is different. See, we're zooming out and we know what's going to happen next. In the moment, while her story's unfolding, it's an entirely different thing. At times, following Jesus makes absolutely no sense. How should this inform our own personal unfolding story?
That we can't see the beginning from the end, so we
Yeah.
need to take note of that. But it's hard when you're in the middle of that grief to think like that.
Yeah.
It really is. It's hard to think, well, down the road,
Yeah.
something good's going to come from this, or it's
Yeah.
hard.
It's, yeah, Janice, go ahead.
And that's why it's good to have people around you who are believers also, because when you're going through your time where you can't see the end, they can remind you that you've seen God, that you have history with him, that he's gotten you through other things, he's gotten them through things, and that like you can always look back at situations and go, oh yeah, I see God was working there, God was working there, but when you're going through it, you can't see any of it.
Yeah. 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 Okay, just a couple more and then we'll wrap this up. So here you go, Janice.
My favorite verse.
This is Janice's favorite verse. She memorized this at all the Bible camps she would go to as a teenager, because everybody had to remember a Bible verse, and Janice remembered or committed to memory John 11:35, which is what Jesus wept. You were always an overachiever.
That's not true.
Well, what's not true?
That was my favorite verse when I was a kid.
Okay.
That was my favorite joke verse when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But it became one of my very favorite verses as an adult, because I finally got it. It just made me love Jesus so much more, to know that even though he knows what's going to happen, he has so much compassion for his friends that he weeps with them,
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
which is
Yeah.
beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A joke verse that turns into a beautiful verse. You know.
Mhm. It
It
was so
really.
odd to see him cry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's It is very telling that Jesus knows what he's going to do. He has the power to do what he's going to do, and but in that moment with his friends, they're brokenhearted, and push he doesn't push past their sadness, but he enters into it. That's incredible, you know. One of the things that one of my complaints, one of my many complaints, was the aloof God. So he's the God up there watching all of us suffer, you know. But when God enters the world in the person of Jesus, that he's not just the God up there who's watching us suffer. He's a man of sorrows who's acquainted with grief, and he comes alongside of us in our suffering. He suffers with us, you know. So, okay. Final one for tonight is that when Jesus calls the stone, this to me is so cool, but so when Jesus calls for the stone to be removed from Lazarus's tomb, Martha points out the obvious. You know, and think about that for a moment. Here again, you think about Jesus is just dogpiling on the offense. He doesn't show up on time. That when he comes, he gives them this little theological response, and one thing after another, and then he goes to the very site where these sisters' beloved brother has been placed into the grave, and he has the audacity to ask for the stone to be removed. It's, in all honesty, I'm surprised they didn't just chase him off with a broom. What are you thinking here, Jesus? You know, he stinks by now. It's been 4 days. If you would have showed up maybe on the first day, yeah, okay. But you talk about an offense, you know. But no one who was assembled there had the authority to permit the stone to be removed other than the sisters. And I've often said that white space between the verse where Jesus says, remove the stone, and then they remove it, is the most significant white space in the Bible. Because they had to nod to somebody, or they said, okay, whatever, you know. And but what does Jesus say about their willingness to trust him? And what does this say about their willingness to trust Jesus?
They had strong faith.
Their faith, yeah.
Yeah, it's just incredible, you know. That, okay, well, if that's what you want, Lord, we'll take it that far, you know. So
They probably still didn't have any idea, you know, like they probably hadn't even entered their mind yet that he was going to walk out of it alive.
yeah.
I know they probably were like, what on earth? Why does he want to see him when he's dead for so long?
And I love what the creators of the show did with this, is that there's a scene, and we'll pick it up next week with that. But after they roll the stone away, they're shooting from the tomb out, and you can see Jesus kind of like, man. Woo wee. So you're right, he does stink. So, all right. How about for you guys before we wrap up tonight? Anything that you'd like to share about this particular story up to this point?
Just when you think it can't get any better.
Yeah. And also, just when you think it can't get any worse.
Yeah,
you know.
The tone has changed, and I told Val we know it's coming, and it's going to take such a horrible. And it's not, because the beginning seasons were so, you're getting to know them and all the disciples, and now we know, and it's going to be so hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
we at the start of season 4, we bought the CDs, but we didn't watch it. We were going along here, but actually the other day I watched the last one.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of snuck that one in.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah. Nora says she really likes this episode more so than The Passion of the Christ. Well, hey, that was another great movie by Mel Gibson back in the day. But the thing I like about The Chosen is that it's this long episodic treatment of the life of Christ and the disciples. I was reading the other day that they're going to be producing other shows. One on the Book of Acts, one on Moses, one on Joseph, and a kids program coming up. So that's cool. We need more quality content done in an artful way to help the people of the world to understand the beauty of Jesus. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you. That I always enjoy our time together, and I appreciate you guys showing up and speaking up, because this time is always better with your input. So I'm going to wrap up. So okay, guys, see you next time. So we are always blessed whenever you tune in and watch our episodes, and so thank you for doing that. This Sunday, I'm doing something that I never have done in my entire ministry, and that I'm going to be preaching an entire message about Christians and politics. And so I hope that you will tune in for that. I've been working really, really, really hard on it. That doesn't mean that necessarily you're going to like everything I say. but I hope that you will just have an open heart and open mind to all of this. So that's this Sunday at 10 a.m., Lord willing.